Welcome to Interstate Passport, the faculty role. My name is Jane Sherman, and this is the second of 4 videos about becoming a passport institution. The first video was an introduction that is recommended for everyone. This is the second one, and in case you have not seen the first one, I'm going to take just a few brief slides at the beginning to orient you to the passport in general. The third and fourth are designed for specific roles at the institutions that are key to implementing the passport, but of course of interest to everyone. Essentially, the Interstate Passport is a national program enabling block transfer of lower division general education attainment based on student learning outcomes rather than on specific courses and credits. The 4 boxes that you see across the bottom identify the 4 basic principles that have guided the development and implementation of the passport, and you will recognize these throughout the presentation that follows. In other words, Interstate Passport is a mega articulation agreement, just like other articulation agreements that you may participate in. However, in this one, the course titles, the syllabi, and the credits don't need to match because the fundamental building blocks, the learning outcomes, align. So a student who completes a passport at one member institution will have completed all lower division general education requirements at any other network member institution. The key to the passport is mapping to shared student learning outcomes. The course requirements and titles, area descriptions, syllabi, and credits will differ depending on the interests and the expertise of the faculty and the needs of the students, but we have found that there is a surprising similarity among faculty in the different states and between 2- and 4-year institutions about what they want their students to achieve by completing a general education program. This example of the general learning outcomes of the University of Hawaii system and the Washington State University represents the differences that you'll see across institutions and how they portray their learning outcomes, the different buckets that they put their expectations into, and then comparing that in the center to the passport learning outcomes. You can see there is similarity, there's also difference, but when you take the next step down to look at the detail, typically you'll find that there is a great deal of similarity. The Interstate Passport was developed by teams of faculty members, but it was initially initiated by the Alliance of Community College Academic Leaders, which is a subgroup of the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education that together were recognized the difficulties that their students were having in transferring to other institutions around the West. They appealed to the Western Academic Leadership Forum, a partner group, also sponsored by WICHE, of 4-year provosts. And together, they asked WICHE to look for funding and to coordinate the development of some way to address the problems that students were having when they were losing credits in transfer. So teams of faculty members for each of 9 areas of learning were assembled from the 2- and 4-year institutions in the 7 WICHE states. And these teams continue to operate and add members from new states as they join the passport. And we'll be have begun reviewing in depth of the different learning outcomes in the different areas to make sure that they're still appropriate and current. These teams were informed by the work that AAC&U has done across the LEAP with the Liberal Education in America's Promise, in looking at what the learning outcomes are for any baccalaureate education and applying that to a more of a transfer level or lower division. It was also informed by the learning outcomes of the participating faculty members and teams from the institutions and states that were developing the work, and then also in some cases by outcomes recommended by some of the professional associations of the college teaching And then with built-in quality assurance based on academic progress data that we'll talk more about later in this video. There are 9 knowledge and skill areas that were identified by this process, and then 63 passport learning outcomes across the 9 areas. The nine areas included the foundational skills that you'll see across the bottom in this slide that upon which others are built, oral communication, written communication, and quantitative literacy. Then the knowledge of concepts at the top and down the left side, natural sciences, human cultures, human society and the individual, and creative expression. And then the cross-cutting skills, critical thinking, and teamwork and value systems. This is an example of one area. This is the human cultures area, which in many institutions is sometimes identified as social sciences, or perhaps by some other broader category. This is just an example of, on the left side, the features that the teams identified, and then the outcomes that they agreed they expect through lower division study of this part of the curriculum. Proficiency criteria were also developed by these teams. Once they had identified the learning outcomes, they started talking about how do we teach these, how do we assess these outcomes? Can we add some precision to this just as examples to help guide or to help faculty at other institutions to understand what we mean by this, and perhaps to reach across and find commonality through the same kinds of teaching activities that they are currently using that will help them to understand more about the learning outcomes. The key about this is that proficiency criteria are examples. They are not requirements. They are just ideas and drawn from the current practice of faculty on the development teams. The key is that faculty at network member institutions define their own ways to teach and to determine student proficiency. Just as an example, this is the first student learning outcome in the natural sciences area. Students apply the basic concepts, vocabulary, and models from a particular scientific discipline in order to solve a problem or carry out a task within that discipline. And then they list some examples of ways that they have found to do that. A limited number, obviously. There are many more. It's just meant to start sparking ideas. My favorite is number 7. Students watch a video on the North American wood frog and use colligative properties to explain how the frog freezes itself. I have no idea what colligative properties are, but I think that's delightful. Then, in order to participate, each institution determines that its own learning outcomes are congruent with and cover the same range of learning as the passport learning outcomes. Then it identifies the menu of courses by which students can achieve the passport learning outcomes. There are 4 more steps listed on this slide, which are handled by other areas of or at least primarily the responsibility of other areas of the institution, and will be covered in other videos. We are going to talk about the first 2 in the remainder of this video. Who leads? Typically, a vice provost or an associate vice president coordinates the institutional efforts. That's because that is the area that usually has the broadest perspective on the whole institution and can bring together the kinds of people that need to participate to complete implementation and to convey information about the passport to students. The faculty is central. It's one reason for placing the responsibilities within the academic area. The General Education Committee, the Faculty Senate Subcommittee, or Faculty Teaching General Education Program reviews the learning outcomes and identifies the block. The registrar, institutional research, advising, admissions, and others also play key roles. The term block, as we use it here, simply refers to the options among courses that students can choose to have the opportunity to achieve the learning outcomes in each area, just as students do to complete your own general education requirements. So, building a passport block, what does that mean? We've identified 3 strategies that institutions have been using, but we also recognize that there are others. There may be innovative ways and more effective ways that you can figure out at your own institution. I'm going to go through the 3, and then you can think about what might be your best approach. The first one we're calling the Student Learning Outcome Express. This one is especially efficient and useful if your own student learning outcomes are consistent with and cover a similar range of learning and level of specificity as the passport learning outcomes. If the passport learning outcomes are found somewhere in your outcomes, though perhaps stated differently, combined in different ways, not exactly the same wording. They may be more or less detailed, but they're there. And if your institution has reviewed your own courses so that you know that students who complete your requirements are able to achieve your stated general education outcomes. In that case, your strategy may be simply to adopt your own general education course requirements as your passport block. So students who complete one would also automatically complete the other. Here's an example from the Colorado Commission on Higher Education. They had aligned their own oral presentational communication requirements at the state level with the AAC&U value rubrics in oral communication, and then they examined those against the Interstate Passport learning outcomes and determined that if an institution had aligned their oral communication requirements with the requirements of the Colorado Commission on Higher Education, they would also meet the Interstate Passport learning outcomes. So that's a state level example. Here's one from Lake Region State College. Simple. This is North Dakota. Take this course. You take this course at the institution to complete a communication requirement and also meets the passport learning requirements. In a different perspective, a slightly more options, College of the Siskiyous in California provides 4 options within this particular learning area. Now Snow College has a much broader set of options, and it includes 2 business department courses and a whole variety of communication department courses. The second strategy that we're going to talk about is number 1, if your learning outcomes, again, are consistent with and cover a similar range of learning as the passport learning outcomes, but perhaps your learning outcomes are broader and less explicit than the passport learning outcomes. So you can't be sure at the beginning that they really are all included. Or perhaps your institution has not reviewed your own courses recently, and students who complete your requirements may or may not have had the opportunity to achieve your own stated general education outcomes. This is sometimes the case if you have not done a recent review of your own general education requirements against your approved general education courses. And if you believe that the passport learning outcomes are found in your own required courses, although perhaps stated differently or combined in different ways, then your strategy would be to map the passport learning outcomes to your general education course pattern, course by course. The example here is the University of Alaska mapping tool. There are other kinds of rubrics that you can use to do this, but this was an early example from an institution that did it this way. I don't mean to say that Alaska had not reviewed their general education recently, because in fact they had just completed a complete review of all their general education courses and had mapped all of their courses to their own learning outcomes. So they found it especially easy to go ahead and do the same thing for the Passport learning outcomes, and this is what it looked like when they mapped the learning outcomes to their own courses that they had approved for their own creative expression or whatever they might have called that. I don't think they called it specifically creative expression, but they found it in the courses in their required coursework. The third strategy that we're showing you is what we're calling off-roading. In this case, your learning outcomes are consistent with Passport learning outcomes, but some areas perhaps are not specifically called out. This often happens for institutions in the area of teamwork, for example, or perhaps creative expression or even oral communication in some cases. You are finding most, but not all, of the 63 Passport learning outcomes somewhere in your own outcomes or requirements, although perhaps yours are stated differently or are combined in different ways. The strategy in this case is to review the learning outcomes of your own courses, including the content and or the required activities that you find in likely courses, what we're calling the natural learning homes, where you think these outcomes could logically be found. For example, for teamwork, many institutions are looking into their science labs, their theater courses with a required group project, community service group projects, and that sort of areas. Then you list those courses again under the teamwork area, or perhaps you tag the courses within the area where they originally appeared. Example of that, Western Oregon University. In this case, they have found learning outcomes that have to do with teamwork within a number of their science courses, but not all of their science courses. They've also found learning outcomes related to teamwork in their physical education courses, which is unique so far. However, you have to take 2 PE activity courses that they've identified, and specifically the ones that have teamwork outcomes in order to complete this requirement. But there are also some theater arts and a writing course that meet those areas at Western Oregon University. North Dakota State College of Sciences has another different approach. They say that in order to complete the teamwork and value systems learning outcomes, you must take one rather traditional social science course where these kinds of things are discussed, but then you also must participate in a teamwork opportunity on the campus. For example, Student Senate, Campus Activities Board, College Ambassadors, campus organization officers, science of leadership, activities where you demonstrate that you can successfully participate as a member of a team. Concordia University at St. Paul has still another approach to teamwork. They are basically saying that they have already considered teamwork and value systems as important parts of their curriculum in general education, and that these concepts and outcomes are introduced and reinforced throughout the general education curriculum. And if you complete the general education curriculum at Concordia, you will have completed the teamwork and value systems outcomes. So a few more things about the passport itself and implementation and quality assurance before we finish this presentation. The passport is recorded on the student transcript, indicating that all lower division general education and passport requirements have been achieved. There are several ways to do this. The approaches were developed by a committee of registrars, so this works for pretty much every institution. So that a student, when they transfer to another institution, if they transfer, they're carrying that certification along with them. Quality assurance I want to mention briefly here. One of the things that is important to know about this is that a minimum grade of C is required in every course that counts in the passport block for a student. Many institutions will not accept a grade below a C and transfer. though some will, but this needs to be something that is universally applicable and acceptable. So a minimum grade of C is required in each course. It's also the case that as the faculty teams were developing the different areas, all of them felt that it was important that a passport represent some level of proficiency, the same level of proficiency actually, across all the 9 areas, and that some could not be balanced out with a lack of proficiency in a different area in order to assure that students were ready to move on to upper division work. Tracking student progress after transfer through the National Student Clearinghouse is an important part of the passport. Each institution reports that receives students, reports the GPA and the credits earned for students who have transferred for at least 2 terms after transfer, so that there can be assurances back to the sending institution and to the Passport Review Board that we'll mention here too, that students are successfully transferring, and that the passport is a benefit to them in terms of ability to move successfully and efficiently through the next levels of their education. Earlier, several years ago, there was a project that was led by Peter Yule at NCHEMS of mapping critical assignments. It was a pilot project with 3 states that were at that time not members of the passport, with a 4-year and a 2-year institution in each of those states. And the project collected assignments that faculty had assigned in order to assess specific outcomes in different areas, and then the student work products that were produced by the students in response to those assignments. The faculty at the other institutions reviewed the assignments that their other faculty in the other states and sectors had set for students, and then separately reviewed the student work products for meeting the actual outcomes, so that they were reviewing whether the assignments were well designed to elicit those outcomes, and also whether the students had managed to demonstrate that they had achieved them. It was an early pilot, but it was reassuring in the sense that there was similarity across states and across sectors in terms both of the efficacy of the assignments and the ability of students to demonstrate their achievement with the outcomes. An evaluation research study of the Interstate Passport impact has been conducted by the Education and Employment Research Center at Rutgers University. It was part of a large grant program that was provided by the United States Department of Education as one part of the funding to build and implement the passport. Passport Review Board is the policy and monitoring board that evaluates the overall effectiveness and also represents the interests of all the states that are involved. The board itself includes specialist members who are experts in transfer and learning outcomes and assessment, but also one representative from each state that participates in the Interstate Passport. As of 2018-19, enough students had not only received passports, but had also transferred and then completed 2 terms post-transfer with a passport that we were able to analyze the data about their GPA after transfer and the credits they had earned. And we're able to demonstrate that the students transferring with a passport were doing well, and that they were achieving GPA and credits earned significantly better than students who were transferring with similar students who were transferring without passports. Institutions report data in order to enable this kind of analysis to the National Student Clearinghouse, either at the end of each term or at the end of the year. They report passport completions just the way they report degree completions, which all institutions do. Institutions then are able to submit student identification to the NSC to determine whether a student who is arriving at the institution has come with a passport the same way they do to determine if students have a degree when they transfer to them. That's the passport verify. And then institutions report the academic progress tracking data to the Student Clearinghouse every year as well. This is part of an addendum to their current contract with the National Student Clearinghouse, and it does not require any additional fees or costs to the institutions. The National Student Clearinghouse sends annual reports for quality assurance back to each sending institution so they know what their students are achieving after they have transferred, where they've gone, and how well it's going, so that they can use that for their own quality improvement. The information that they receive can be disaggregated by gender, race, Pell eligible, military, first generation, age, GPA credits before they transferred, and others, so that they can evaluate in greater detail where they might need to put any additional effort on their part. And also it allows the Passport Review Board to ensure that institutions are in fact all preparing students adequately for transfer. Questions often arise, and I'm going to try to answer a few of these, and then hope that you will contact us with other questions that you have after you review it. First one is, how many credits are in a passport, and what if the sending institution's passport has more or fewer credits than ours, than yours? Typically, so far, institutions we found have 30 to 38 semester credits in their passport, similar to what they have in their general education programs. And of course, the numbers will vary depending on how many credits they require in their own general education programs. What if extra credits above your credit they require? What if it comes in? What if the passport comes in with more credits than you require in your general education? Then the extra credits above your credit requirements can be applied to electives that they wouldn't otherwise take, or in other categories, but they are not lost. If they come in with fewer credits than you require in your general education program, still all the lower education division general education requirements are met, and no general education credits additionally are required. However, if they need more credits in order to meet your total credit requirement for graduation, of course, that would be required, and they might perhaps take some extra electives or additional courses in their major, whatever it takes to meet your total graduation credit requirement. Can we require students who earn a passport from us to complete our own general education requirements, even if it includes additional outcomes not found in the passport learning outcomes? Yes, students should complete your own lower division general education requirements as a basic part of learning a passport, even if it includes areas that are not covered in the passport. It simplifies everything for students and for you, and ensures that you're comfortable with the students that you hand on to another institution if they transfer. When can we require students who earn a passport elsewhere to complete unique requirements of our own lower division general education program? There are only two times. First, when a requirement is mandated in state statute. Obviously, you need to follow your state laws. For example, Wyoming requires a course in Wyoming history. Students who come in with a passport from elsewhere still need to do something to meet that requirement before they graduate. The second one is an independent faith-based institution may require passport transfer students to complete the same religion or philosophy courses that it requires of all students for graduation. An example that I think about here is, again, the University of Alaska at Anchorage. They require their own students to complete a course that focuses on Native Alaskan issues, culture, history, um, language, uh, some aspect substantively of Native Alaskan uh, area. So when students come to them from elsewhere with a passport, however, they have said that they recognize that the passport itself includes strong, robust diversity, learning outcomes within the areas that it covers, and that they will not require students to take that additional requirement after they arrive. Can we require students to take additional lower division courses from the general education menu that are required for entry into specific majors? Yes, of course. Students who come to you without the prerequisites for a specific major, of course, will need to take their preparation at your institution in order to enter the majors of their choice. Ideally, students will have taken some prerequisites, especially the right math within general education, but we all know that students sometimes, or perhaps often, change their goals after they transfer and may need to retool to acquire the right pathway. Thank you. That has been the presentation about the faculty role. I'm sure you have more questions. I encourage you to email Interstate Passport at wichita.edu with questions, or to go through the website at interstatepassport.wichita.edu to learn more there. I hope you enjoy becoming a participant in the Passport Network, and good luck to all of you.